We are recording. It's awkward to put it all together. And I've actually rehearsed it this morning, so we're going to have some drop stuff to cut off. But anyway, so what is it that... What experiences do you think people should be prepared for when they come to a darkness retreat?
Well, there's at least 3 different kinds of darkness retreats. One of them is solo. You're by yourself, you're in the dark. And it's not that dissimilar in a way to the little mini darkness retreat you might have in your own bed in the middle of the night with your eyes closed. Okay, start that one over because you're moving around.
Sorry.
Okay, so it depends on what kind of darkness retreat, what would determine what sort of experience that you might have. The most basic kind, or let's say in a way the most difficult kind, is where it's just you for a period of time you've committed to. It's pitch dark, there's absolutely no light, and you are wide awake, but if you like, bereft of your sense of vision. And that's one type. Another type would be where you're not alone, where you're with other people who are in the dark retreat for the similar reasons as you are, and you might practice together whatever tradition you're from, and use the powers, if you like, of the altered state of consciousness that you achieve in the dark to explore other regions, not only within yourself but within your relationships. And then the third sort of darkness retreat would be one that is strongly led by a person who is there as the designated leader, who is intending to create a certain ambience, a certain vibration, a certain mentality, emotional stage set and setting for you to grow. In theory, it would be somebody who was, if you like, at a higher development level from you, an attendee. And of course, if you were a leader of such an event, you would definitely need to be prepared with a great deal of material, which you then would lead the people who were coming along in order to enjoy the enriching experience.
And as a leader, they would probably have, there's no light whatsoever to organize things, so they would truly have to be prepared in a different kind of way than probably anything else they've ever done.
Well, it's possible, but I think that people who've been engaged in a psycho-spiritual practice for a while are going to have quite a few resources available. Just internally, they'll be able to lead meditations, they'll be able to have discussions of whatever nature is relevant to their practice. And I would expect that anyone with a number of years of serious practice who has also experienced leading wouldn't be consulting notes in general. They would be addressing the issues rather directly.
That makes a lot of sense to me. Also, the difference might be also in time. What kind of times do people usually use as a reference for a darkness retreat? How many days?
Tradition has, at least in the sort of Hindu/Taoist Eastern tradition, where the darkness retreats that were available were all, if you like, in natural caves, were typically 4 days, 7 days, or multiple spans of weeks, up to 7 weeks in one go. And of course, the challenges of going through a darkness retreat is directly proportional to the time, because the number of days, the number of hours causes alterations in one's consciousness, in one's state of consciousness. And so I believe that this is a practice like many others that requires building up to. One wouldn't want to attempt to climb Mount Everest on the very first outing. One would start with some low hills and then work their way up to gradually more and more challenging and demanding situation. So darkness retreats are very much like this. It takes a progressive development in order to understand the parameters that one is going to encounter in this altered state of consciousness.
It's my understanding initially, a lot of times people are so sleep deprived that the first 24 hours, because of the darkness and the need for rest, that a lot of people sleep for the first 24 hours.
Yes, and that's the response of the melatonin, and the melatonin that's secreted in the brain is exactly the way that our physical bodies organize an encounter of new conditions. And so clearly the darkness retreat per se doesn't really start until after this sleep deprivation has been overcome. Yeah, so I think that if a person is well rested when they're going in, they're going to be able to start to experience the consciousness related benefits sooner.
And that's some of the stuff that would be explained during the application process. People coming for a darkness retreat don't necessarily just sign up and come. They actually have to prepare a little bit before they come to make sure that they're going to get the maximum benefit that's available to them, right?
Yeah, I think that this is something that if you just ask a person, an ordinary person with a typical level of spiritual development, what their reaction to being put in the dark or volunteering to go into the dark for a period of time would be, and most would react with some degree of fear. And this was quite normal and also indicative of, if you like, a degree of unawakeness, and an unawakeness in the sense of not being aware of the dynamics around the voices in one's own head, how to control that, how to achieve different states. And I think that a person who is not at least a little bit practiced with achieving quiet and sort of what the Zen Buddhists would say, a state of equanimity, mental peace, mental calmness, mental presence, and mindfulness, as the words go these days, it would be pretty challenging. In fact, it's daunting and would cause a good deal of fear. And even a person who is in the light practiced mindfulness and presence and centering prayer and other practices that are intended to gain control of the psycho-spiritual environment that one is in, one is still likely to be challenged at each stage of, if you like, the lengthening darkness retreat.
With the Land of Enchantment Darkness Retreat, there's no attachment to any particular tradition. You've mentioned a couple of traditions that have used this for thousands of years.
Well, yes, because we don't believe that attaching yourself to a tradition means letting go of what the good and the benefit may be from all the other traditions. So we wish to be perfectly, let's say, accessible to truth and quality good experiences from whatever quarter they come to, with a proviso that we would like these the general sense of any tradition to be one that sort of seeks love, light, unity, and the presence of the divine, and not vice versa.
Most of the organized darkness retreats, when I looked on the internet, are only available in quite a bit of travel, either Thailand, Mexico, Guatemala. There's really not a whole lot of availability in the U.S. that's already organized for a darkness retreat.
Yeah, I think this would be reasonably explained by just a general lack of awareness in the culture of what a darkness retreat is and what the benefits that it might offer are. And I would expect that in time, as more and more people have experienced a darkness retreat, both as a psycho-spiritual quest thing and also as overcoming personal challenges for overcoming one's tendencies toward neuroticism, if that's what's bringing them to the darkness retreat, that this would be viewed as a much more mainstream practice. And what we would like to, well, another point that I would make is that the facilities in the United States being lacking is probably not so much for lack of caves as the lack of knowing what to do with them. Caves per se are a fairly hostile environment, and having the comfort of a home that's been converted to a darkness retreat just by blacking out covering the windows effectively and managing the doors and so forth, makes it a much more practical and accessible experience than it might otherwise have been.
And this knowledge that we're trying to get to other people is in reference to the inner journey, and a lot of people have a hard time with their meditation catching traction per se and expanding their consciousness. A darkness retreat, do you feel, would help aid them in making that transition? Maybe give them another tool that would work?
I think there's a kind of logic to first setting aside time, then managing one's insistent, say, thoughts, which would try to distract one and propel one off of the purpose of the meditation. And then, so if you like, setting aside time is one way of walling oneself off so that one is denying permission to anything that would distract. But
and in today's world, that's a major step to taking the ability.
And then once one has had some success or maybe no success with simply setting aside a period of time, you can up the stakes by going into the darkness retreat. It would not only have a fixed time that was agreed in advance, it would also have, of course, this light deprivation, which means that all activities that one could presumably do, looking at their phone or anything else, is one has chosen to take those off the table. Therefore, any insistent voices that might say, oh, it's time to check Facebook or what's going on Twitter, those are necessarily silenced. And this can be extended to a fairly extensive degree by being in an environment that's also quiet and also relatively unstructured, so that one doesn't, but provided for where one doesn't necessarily need to think about the next meal or think about what's next. There's simply being in the moment and attempting to create a firm grip on the state of consciousness that is available to them when they are in the moment, if you like, and not trying to connect in a strong way to their sensory material self.
Yeah, by eliminating what the eyes can take in from light, it frees up a whole lot of the accessibility to the mind and to the brain, because it doesn't have that steady stream of information coming at it anymore. You have a little bit more power over your mind, I believe you might.
It becomes more aware. One becomes more aware of the role of choice in what is one thinking about at any given moment, where very often a rather unawake person
has no idea that they're choosing the direction that they follow most of the time.
Or they may simply be like riding a horse without holding the reins. The horse has its head and it's going wherever it wants to, and one is riding along, and one has the option at any time of picking up the reins and dragging the horse's head around and going where they would like to go rather than where the horse would like to go. And the horse in this analogy is, of course, all of the thoughts and ideas that we pick up from our environment, ones that we aren't necessarily the originator of. And this is a simple, silly example would be just a pop song that gets in your head and takes your attention, and you focus on it, And it may actually block out what you really want to be thinking about, or the fact that you may not want to think about anything at all. You may just want to peacefully observe where you are.
Yes, music and outside distractions can really take you in a different direction for your time than you expected. And if you're not aware of that, it can really be unproductive. And once you're aware of it, it's very powerful to be able to stop that horse from going off so far.
Right. So having this peace and this ability to achieve the peace isn't uniquely on offer in a darkness retreat. It is only pretty obvious if one is in the state of darkness for some period of time and not feeling at peace, where one can then confront exactly what it is that they have in their mental process that they need to deal with. They need to change, they need to de-energize, not pay attention to, turn away from, in order to have that resource back, the resource of attention. Because we have only a limited amount of attention, and we have to use it wisely in order to be happy.
That brought up another subject that I did a lot of research on the internet. Many people do a fasting or a detoxification when they commit to doing a darkness retreat. How do people eat in the dark? How do people? How would they get their food?
Well, obviously, the preference would be for anything that is absolutely safe. No knives needed, nothing like this. There's little limit as to what might be provided to you according to what you believe your needs are, and that's entirely a matter for the logistics side of the darkness retreat to provide you for. If you need the certain water from the tears of a certain statue, that, if it's available, probably can be obtained for you. If you need energized or blessed water, well, you'll have to provide that to the people running the logistics of the darkness retreat. But there isn't really any limitation that I know of, other than one's experience of food is quite different in the dark. The texture and the heat of it and other properties of it become, in a way, much more pronounced. We are very visual eaters, as it turns out, but this is a beautiful area to talk about what one of the real benefits of the darkness retreat is, which is that you won't know anything about this until you've personally experienced it. I can sit and talk, or anyone else can sit and talk about it, and you're not going to really, really appreciate the, if you like, the feel of it until you've actually tried it.
Yes, I think that the experience is very unusual for someone in our current culture to actually be in complete darkness. They may not even realize how much light is in what they consider dark, and how much of a difference that it will make to actually experience pure darkness. At the darkness retreat, we have no ambient light, no lights on any devices, no microwave, no LEDs, no sneaking around a curtain. There's zero light available.
Yeah, and that's the way it has to be in order to preserve the brain state that is what the foundation of what we're looking for. It's possible to see a little incidental light on occasion from, for example, rubbing one's hand on a fleece which has a little electro sparks and so forth. That sort of light isn't really the big deal or the big point. The point is to be moving away from depending on one's eyes for, if you like, all information and all stimulation, and becoming much, much more aware of, if you like, the internal sense, the inner voice, what triggers the inner voice, how one is contending with anything that's negative that might come up, fear or some irritation at being distracted or anything at all that's negative, this becomes the focus, because what one wants to try to achieve is definitely a state of accepting whatever is happening in the dark selfness, and not putting any expectations or any insistence about what is going on. And most of my remarks I've just been making are all related to the solo, solitary darkness retreat, because if one is with other people and interacting with the other people, especially doing lots of talking, it will be a very different experience. And of course, if there is a leader, a guru, it will be completely different. It will be, the experience will be shaped by whatever the leader wishes to construct on the foundation of, let's say, the ability to attend and really, really carefully pay attention that is available in the dark.
Yes, I agree that there'll be significantly different experiences for people, both by themselves in a small group or with a leader with a total direction. You know, some of these people may come with a direction for physical healing, because the body at rest can do amazing things for itself. And it's very difficult for people to achieve a true restful state in our current Western lifestyles.
Definitely, if there's a schedule which one is working to, yes, it's possible to really ever relax, because a little part of the mind keeps track of time, and the clock is running.
And it is completely impossible to track time other than mentally when you're at a darkness retreat.
Well, yes, I suppose you could ask the person who's coming and bringing your food what time it is, and if you haven't agreed in advance, they may tell you, but it may be part of the overall experience to lose track of time in a quite literal sense.
Yeah, the benefits of losing track of time, I think, because time is a man-made creation, so to speak, it would be an easy thing for people to experience what it would be like to lose track of time. And it would probably be very surprising how that translates. Is there anything that you can think of that we haven't covered as part of a basic understanding of what to expect in a darkness retreat?
I think it's important for everyone to come without expecting that they are going to have an experience that is very much like a blind person's experience of no.
Yes, I agree with you completely that this will not, there's no way to undo what you already have experienced in all of your life.
Which is if you like, the reality of the difference between a sighted person and a blind person's model of the world is fairly extensively have been studied, and the conclusion that one would draw from looking at this material in relation to how blind people see the world, one would have to conclude that it's not something that a sighted person can enter into. The notion of space, the notion of time, the notion of place, everything is going to be a little bit different from a blind person's experience. Having said that, if we are prepared in an appropriate way, in, if you like, my tradition, what we would do with the lack of a visual stimulus is we would actually use that empty space, if you like, the blackness, the void, to create, to be visualizing, to be able to construct the imagery of whatever it is that we wish to work with. So we're actually not completely, if you like, abandoning the sense of sight. What we're doing is we're changing the flow of information into, if you like, those parts of the brain, those parts of the mind, where previously they were passively receiving photons from the outside and converting them into images and assigning names and shapes and so forth to them. So we would reverse the flow in a way, or at least for part of the trip, and creatively visualize things as part of the exercise of what we're actually trying to accomplish in the dark.
Let's let the helicopter go by and I'll chop that out.
Yeah, it's we're definitely in the flight path here.
Oh, for the helicopters. During the week of fair, oh my gosh, so many helicopters. In reference to many of the testimonials that I reviewed on the internet, a lot of people, a very common experience was the fact that there's a certain separation that occurs and allows you to realize in a different way that you're not your physical body, that your internal guidance system is actually running your body. And in the darkness, you can have a stronger feeling of the fact that everything is tied together, but they are separate and they are different.
Yes, and there's, as I mentioned, states of consciousness, and this is one where you have different levels of activity of different kinds of awareness of what the self is. It's possible that people have reported that they enter into an extended, vivid or lucid dreaming state over the days which they may be in the darkness retreat. And it could be challenging for people who have, let's say, mental disability to some extent, where they're somewhat delusional. But this for a person with an ordinary.
I forgot to. Sorry.
With a person with an ordinary, let's say, mental capacity for distinguishing the internal from the external, would then find themselves possibly challenged by the many strands that one actually uses to construct the moment-to-moment sense of reality, and therefore having some of these strands relocate away from what's one's ordinary senses. It can be a dislocating, possibly frightening experience. Nothing should be profoundly frightening to anyone in a, if you like, urban refuge type darkness retreat, because if there's any fear of, oh, I'm losing my mind, or I can't distinguish between what is real and what's if you like, what's, let's say, exterior to me and what's interior to me, then one only needs to step out the door into the daylight, and the whole spell will evaporate in a very short period of time. And this is precisely why one doesn't want to do this. One doesn't want to go outside into the light until they have completed their predetermined journey.
Yes, they always have the ability to cut the experience short if it becomes necessary. They're not locked in. Different experiences have been recorded for the different lengths of time. Much of that has to do probably with the chemical changes in the brain, the excess of melatonin and the absence of all that video eye sensory perception, allowing your brain to make those other connections so that you can have a more powerful link to your expansive consciousness.
Yes, fair enough. The whole theory of what is exactly going on, I'm afraid, it's best to leave that to experiencers, because what we're really talking about here is giving individuals access to, if you like, an unprejudiced, pure experience without programming a lot of expectation necessarily, and allowing them to discover what it is that they do, how they react to the circumstances. It's a pure experience like, I suppose, bungee jumping or jumping out of an airplane. Maybe not that short and sharp, but very different in kind from what one